Democratization, or democratization, is the transition to a more democratic political regime, including substantive political changes moving in a democratic direction. It may be the transition from an authoritarian regime to a full democracy, a transition from an authoritarian political system to a semi-democracy, or transition from a semi-authoritarian political system to a democratic political system. The outcome may be consolidated. A democratization may face frequent reversals. Different patterns of democratization are often used to explain other political phenomena, such as whether a country goes to a war or whether its economy grows. Whether and to what extent democratization occurs has been attributed to various factors, including economic development, historical legacies, and civil society. Some accounts of democratization emphasize how elites drove democratization, whereas other accounts emphasize grassroots bottom-up processes. There is considerable debate about the factors which affect or ultimately limit democratization. A great many things, including economics, culture, and history, have been cited as impacting on the process. Scholars such as Seymour Lipset, Carl Boy, Susan Stokes, Dietrich Ruskemeier, Evelyn Stevens, and John Stevens argue that economic development increases the likelihood of democratization. According to Daniel Treisman, there is a strong and consistent relationship between higher income and both democratization and democratic survival in the medium term, but not necessarily in shorter time windows. Robert Dahl argued that market economies provided favorable conditions for democratic institutions. A higher GDP per capita correlates with democracy, and some claim the wealthiest democracies have never been observed to fall into authoritarianism. The rise of Hitler and of the Nazis in Weimar Germany can be seen as an obvious counterexample. But although in early 1930s Germany was already an advanced economy, by that time, the country was also living in a state of economic crisis virtually since the First World War. This is because development may entrench the incumbent leader but make it more difficult for him deliver the state to a son or trusted aide when he exits. However, the debate about whether democracy is a consequence of wealth, a cause of it, or both processes are unrelated, is far from conclusive. Another study suggests that economic development depends on the political stability of a country to promote democracy. Clark, Robert and Golder, in their reformulation of Albert Hirschman's model of exit, voice and loyalty, explain how it is not the increase of wealth in a country per se which influences a democratization process, but rather the changes in the socio-economic structures that come together with the increase of wealth. They explain how these structure changes have been called out to be one of the main reasons several European countries became democratic when their socio-economic structures shifted because modernization made the agriculture sector more efficient. Bigger investments of time and resources were used for the manufacture and service sectors. In England, for example, members of the gentry began investing more on commercial activities that allowed them to become economically more important for the state. This new kind of productive activities came with new economic power where assets became more difficult for the state to count and hence more difficult to tax. Because of this, predation was no longer possible and the state had to negotiate with the new economic elites to extract revenue. A sustainable bargain had to be reached because the state became more dependent of its citizens remaining loyal, and with this, citizens had now leverage to be taken into account in the decision-making process for the country. Adam Prevorsky and Fernando Limongi argue that while economic development makes democracies less likely to turn authoritarian, there is insufficient evidence to conclude that development causes democratization. Ivor Bellin argues that under certain circumstances, the bourgeois and labor are more likely to favor democratization, but less so under other circumstances. Economic development can boost public support for authoritarian regimes in the short to medium term. Andrew Nathan argues that China is a problematic case for the thesis that economic development causes democratization. Michael Miller finds that development increases the likelihood of democratization in regimes that are fragile and unstable. but makes this fragility less likely to begin with. There is research to suggest that greater urbanization, through various pathways, contributes to democratization. A 2016 study found that preferential trade agreements encourage the democratization of a country. In particular, if the PTA partners are themselves democracies. Liberalization in autocracies was more likely to succeed in countries that had the advantage of a better starting